Hello and welcome to Color with Kendi. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through my Messy Watercolor Brush set for Procreate. I'm going to walk through every single brush in this video series, and this video is for anyone who has purchased a brush set or is interested in getting it and wants to know exactly how to use the brushes. Because sometimes you buy brushes and you don't know how to get the most out of them. Well, I'm here to help. If you haven't already purchased the brush pack and you want to find out more, you can find a link in the description and the pinned comment. Okay, let's begin. So once you have made your purchase, you will receive a bunch of different files. One will be the brush set file, the main one. So I'm just going to show you. When you import it, it's going to look like this. It's the Messy Watercolor set. This is the main set. Then there is a Messy Watercolor extra set that you will also get. And there will be a bunch of other files for you to import into Procreate as well. There's a reference PDF, so if you ever want to look at what the textures look like, just to refer to it, there's a PDF that you can look at and check out all of the brushes at a glance. You'll also receive a paper texture canvas, which is 4800 by 6000 pixels, and you can use it at this size or you can crop it. And then there's also an 8 by 10 inch canvas, which is what I would typically use. And there's also a brush tutorial canvas, which we will be using today. So let's open up that canvas. This video is meant to be a follow along video, so I am going to be going a little bit slower so you can follow along with me. But if you want to watch this at a faster speed, you can change the settings by tapping on the cog icon. And there are also chapters in the description and pinned comment, so you can jump around as you'd like to. Now we have a lot to cover in this video series because this is actually one of my biggest sets. So we have a lot of brushes here, and then there's also the Messy Extras brush, and we also need to talk about the paper textures. Can we do it all in one video? No. So we're going to do this in parts. So today is part 1. In part 1, we're going to discuss rough sketch all the way down to Brushy Dots in the main brush set. And then in part 2, we'll discuss Messy Shape Maker all the way down to the wet ink detail. And we will discuss Messy Extras in part 3. And also, I wanted to mention that I will be talking about the paper texture today as well in part 1. Okay, so let's open up the brush library and make sure that you're on the Messy Watercolor brush set. And we're going to start off with the dual color background A and work our way down to Brushy Dots. And then towards the end of this video, we'll talk about these brushes. These brushes are a little bit easier to use, so I don't want to spend as much time on them, but let's talk about the fun stuff first. I think these are the more fun brushes, so let's talk about those first. So I'd like you to tap on the dual color background A brush, because that's the one we're going to talk about first. Then go into your layers panel and make sure that you have DC background turned on. We're going to test the brushes together in this layer. So this is a dual color brush. And if you've never used dual color brushes before, then they are quite fun to use because you get to select the 2 colors. So right now, if I tap on my color menu, I have black and I have white. Not the ideal colors to test this with, so let's change the colors. Now, if you are using the colors menu and you're on palettes mode, you're not going to see those 2 colors. So I suggest tapping on disc mode or any of the other modes. So you can see 2 colors up at the top. These are the 2 colors you can select. So I'm going to select, let's say, yellow. And then for my second color, I'm going to tap here and I'll select blue. It can be any shade of blue that you like. So I'm going to select that. So now these are my 2 colors. And the color that you see here is going to be your main color. So when you use this brush with light pressure, you're going to see your main color. And then when you start to press more pressure, you'll start to see more of the second color, but it will be mixed in with this color. So you see there's a little hint of like a green here. That's because it's mixing in these 2 colors. And you're seeing a little bit of the green. So this is a pressure sensitive brush, and I would use this to create a background. going to show you how this would look with a different set of colors. So let's say I do orange and then maybe go red, and let's see. So now this is going to be my main color, which I will see with light pressure. And then with heavy pressure, I'll see more of that orange. And if you want to see a bigger variety in terms of the differences, just pick two very different colors. So let's say I picked green and orange. I don't think they're going to look very good together, but let's try out a yellow, like a very bright yellow and the orange. So this is yellow, and then you see the orange, and then you see the yellow. So now you see more of a difference. So this is pressure sensitive, and depending on how much pressure you apply, you'll see a difference. So this is what this brush looks like. It's really great for coloring in backgrounds. So I'm going to undo that with 2 fingers. Now, dual color background B is a similar brush. It has a slightly different texture, and it's also a dual color brush, so you'd want to select the 2 colors of your choice here. So for dual color background B, same concept. With light pressure, you'll see more of the color that you see in your color menu. And then with heavier pressure, you will see more of the second color. And then if you keep your pencil on the screen and lighten your pressure, you'll see more of the first color. So you can have a lot of fun with this. So as you can see, this definitely has a different texture on the edges. Both of these brushes are really great for textures, and you will see a lot more of the inherent watercolor texture with darker colors. So let's say I selected black and red. And red is my first color. With light pressure, I'll see more of the red. And then with heavy pressure, I'll see more of the black. But as I lighten the pressure, I will see some red. Okay, so now that you know how these work, let's move on to the next 2 brushes. So let's go to the layers menu and uncheck DC background, tap on basic watercolor and check it. So these are the brushes that I would use to fill in shapes. So let's check them out together. So the basic watercolor, as the name mentions, is a very basic brush, and you will see some watercolor texture with it. So I'm going to show you this with a lighter color and with a darker color because you'll see quite the difference. So let's go to blue. Let's go in with a lighter blue. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and let's draw a circle and fill it in without lifting the pencil. So as you can see, there is some watercolor texture. This is a little lighter than this area here. It's very subtle. It's not meant to be too in your face. Now, if you used a darker shade, you'll see a lot more of the color variation. So let's go into our color menu and let's make this a darker shade and do the same thing. Draw without lifting the pencil. So you can see a lot more of that variation. So you see, it's still quite subtle. It's not meant to be in your face. Now, the thing to remember about this brush is that when you lift your pencil and then you put your pencil back on the screen, you're going to see some overlap. So it's kind of like the overlap that you would see when you paint with watercolor. You let it dry and then you paint over it. So that's why there's an overlap. If you don't like the overlap, try not to lift your pencil when you're painting. But let's say you do lift your pencil and paint and you want to smudge it out, you definitely can. Just go to the smudge tool and make sure that you've selected the smudger. So the Messy Watercolor set, just select smudger A, go to a small size to start, and you can just smudge out that overlap. And let's go back to the brush. The other thing I wanted to talk about for this particular brush is it is pressure sensitive. So if you apply low pressure, you're going to get a very thin line, but with the same brush size, I'm not changing the brush size. If you apply heavier pressure, you can get a much thicker line. And what I like to do is vary the pressure as I'm drawing a stroke. So it ends up looking a lot more like painting with a paintbrush. So you get that variety. That's how you can get it, just by changing your stroke pressure. And if you zoom in, you'll notice that we have a little bit of an interesting roughness to the edge. That's much like what you would see with watercolor. Now, let's move on to dark edge watercolor. So tap on the brush library and go to dark edge. So right here off the bat, you can see that they look quite different. This one is not as pigmented in the middle. It has more of a dark edge. So let's tap on that and let's zoom in. And same thing, you can fill a shape. And what you will see is that it's lighter in the center than this was, but definitely a darker edge. So when you have watercolor that dries, sometimes you see that the edge has a little bit more darkness, so you can use this brush to make that look. And similarly to this brush, it's pressure sensitive, low pressure, high pressure, and then when you vary the pressure, you get that sort of look. The other thing to remember about this particular brush is if you don't want that roughness, do you see how this edge is a lot more rough than the other brush? You can use lighter pressure and you won't get as much roughness as you fill in your shape. But if you use heavy pressure, I'm going to use really heavy pressure, I haven't changed the brush size, you will get a lot more roughness on the edge, and the darker edge will be a lot more visible. And as with the other brush, if you lift your pencil and then reapply pigment, you will get that overlap, and you can smudge that out, or to avoid that altogether, don't lift your pencil when you're painting in a shape. Now, I did want to mention something which I should have mentioned earlier on in this video. So for all of my brushes, I have these preset sizes that you can tap on right here. You don't have to use these sizes. You can definitely use sizes in between, but these are basically the sizes I use these brushes at the most. And brush size definitely makes a difference in terms of how these brushes will look. So I would suggest that you experiment with different brush sizes and use these as a starting point, and you can always change the brush sizes as you please. Let's go to the layers panel and uncheck this and go to rough and dry edge brushes and tap it. All right. So these are also dual color brushes because I love dual color brushes. They're just so fun to work with. So let's tap on the brush library and go to dual color rough edge. So there's a rough edge and a dry edge. The difference is the edge is slightly different, and also the dual color dry edge brush is a little bit more pigmented. As you can see here, this looks far more pigmented than this one. Okay, so let's select two colors for this dual color rough edge. Pick any colors that you like, but ideally colors that are slightly different so you can see the difference. So I'm going to select yellow and then maybe red, almost on magenta, but not quite. So those are my two colors, and the color that you see here will always be your first primary color. So let's zoom in, and I'm using the preset size of 40. And if you apply light pressure, you'll see more of that first color. And then as you apply more pressure, you'll see a little bit of the second color mixed in with the first color. So as you can tell, this color is not very dark, so it's not having much of an impact. But let's say I change this to black. You'll see a lot more of an impact. So I'm going to tap again here to make this my first color. And let's try this again. So with light pressure and then with heavy pressure, do you see? You can see that it's basically mixing this color and this color together for you. And depending on how much pressure you apply, you'll get a different look. So with this brush, I like to vary the pressure to get a variety of different looks. And also, I would recommend that you use this for things like backgrounds. It's a really fun brush to use as a background brush. And then you can always smudge it out if you'd like to. So that is the dual color rough edge brush. Play around with the colors because it really shines with different colors. And let's now move on to the dual color dry edge brush. Tap on that and let's keep the same two colors we have. Light pressure. So as you can tell, it's a bit more pigmented already than the other one. And now heavy pressure. And then if I don't release the pencil but keep light pressure, you create a slightly different look. So depending on how much pressure I apply, I can get interesting effects. So as you can tell, it is quite similar to this brush. The edge is slightly different and it's a bit more pigmented. So that's going to be the difference with this dual color dry edge. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the layers panel. I'm gonna turn this layer off and then go to DC dry brush, DC dry brush, and that is going to be turned on, and let's test out these two. These are also dual color and they're also dry brushes, but they look a little bit different. I wanted to give you guys a variety in terms of the dry brushes so you can pick and choose which ones suit your illustration the most. So let's tap on DC dry brush A. As you can see from the images here, they are different. So let's use the same colors we had previously, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to use maybe the largest preset size to show you this, and use light pressure. That's what it looks like. And then as I put in heavy pressure and I lighten the pressure, you can get a variety. So the trick with these brushes that change as you change the pressure is to keep moving your pencil on the screen. If you didn't do that, then you would invoke the the quick shape of Procreate, and it would be weird. So I want to show you what I mean. So let's say I was doing this and then I did this and I didn't keep moving my pencil. Do you see? Isn't that weird? That has nothing to do with the brush. That's not the problem with the brush. That is quick shape. Quick shape is something in Procreate where when you draw lines and you hold your pencil, it will make weird shapes. And it's actually useful for making triangles, rectangles, that sort of thing. But when you're using brushes, it's not ideal. See, it says edit polyline. We have invoked quick shape. So when you're using these brushes, don't stop moving the brush when you want to create that color variation. So I'm just going to undo and undo. So to recap, when you move the brushes, keep moving and then change the pressure to get a variety of different colors. Let me show you this with maybe a different color example so you can really see the difference. Let's go in with a very, very pale green and the blue. So light pressure, and then I'm gonna keep moving, and then heavy pressure. Do you see what happened there? And then light pressure, do you see? You really see a difference when the colors that you've selected here are really different. So this is a dry brush A, again, very good for backgrounds, also for shapes as well. Now let's move on to dual color dry brush B. Okay, let's select another color. Let's go in with, yeah, maybe these two. Let's see. So low pressure, I'm seeing more of that yellow, and then heavy pressure. I'm seeing the yellow, but it's mixed in with this blue. And this does not look like the nicest result because it's just, these two colors don't really work well together for this particular brush. So undo, and let's select another color here. Let's select the red, yeah. And then let's go back to the yellow to make that the primary color. And low pressure, heavy pressure, and then low pressure. So this brush is great for any dry brush kind of strokes. And it can add texture on top of, let's say, an animal or on top of a building that needs some texture. So it is essentially a really good dry brush. So now that you know how to use these two, let's move on to the next set of brushes here. All right, let's go to the layers panel, turn that off, and then let's tap on Brushy Dots and turn that on. Brushy Dots. This is an interesting brush. I didn't know what to call this, but you'll know what I mean when you see it. So I'm going to select, let's say, red, and then tap on Brushy Dots. So at low pressure, that's what it looks like. And at heavy pressure, this is what it looks like. So it's almost as if you've taken your brush and then you have tapped many times on the screen. And I would not use this brush on its own. I would generally use it to add texture to a shape I've already made. So let me show you how to do that. So I'm gonna go to the basic watercolor brush, and then we're going to add some texture on with the brushy dots. So let's tap on basic watercolor. Let's go in with a slightly lighter color first. Okay, so let's fill it in. So this has a very subtle watercolor texture, but we can do more. So let's go in to the layers panel, tap on plus. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some additional texture in a clipping mask. This may sound complicated, but it really isn't. So let's just tap on the layer and then tap on clipping mask. That's it. So what this will do is anything you add in this clipping mask layer is going to show up on the pre-existing shapes in this layer. So basically, once I show you this, you'll understand what's happening. So let's go back to that red color we had, and then let's go to brushy dots. So now I'm going to use that brushy dots, low pressure, high pressure, and I can reapply some pigment. So what's happening is the texture that I'm applying is only applying to that circle that we have underneath. It's not going outside the bounds of the circle. So this is a really great way to add some fun texture on top of an existing shape. So I really like to use this brush to add some texture, and you can even do it in a different color if you'd like. It can add some visual interest to your shapes. So that's how I would use the brush. Okay, so now let's move on to the next brush. Let's go to the layers panel and let's turn these two layers off. Go to pencils and turn it on. So at this point, if you'd like to take a break, I do suggest taking one because, sometimes you just need a break while you're doing these things. So yeah, go get a cup of coffee, some tea, and then come back. Okay, so we're going to talk about the rough sketch brush and the dual color damp pencil. So with all of my brush sets, I always like to provide some sketch brushes and some pencils with it so that you can use that for your sketching process. So that's what this brush is for. So for the rough sketch brush, let's go all the way up to the top of this brush set, the main brush set, and tap on rough sketch. And let's select a really dark gray, which is on this side, and let's zoom in. So I'm using the preset size, that is 20. And this brush is pressure sensitive, so low pressure, that's what it looks like. Hope you can see the texture. And then heavy pressure, that's what it looks like. So definitely you can create a variety of different strokes with this. And also, when you're drawing with this, if you want to have thin lines and thicker lines, just vary your pressure. Now, if you are having trouble with varying the pressure, then I would suggest that you watch my brush problems video and go to the pressure curve section because that part of the video will really help you. And this brush, I would use it for adding details to the watercolor paintings. I love that mixed media look where you're using pencil with watercolor, or you could just use it for sketching too. It's a really nice sketch brush. Use light pressure, and then you can use heavy pressure once you want to refine your sketch as well. So that's what I would use this brush for. Now let's move on to dual color damp pencil. So let's tap on that, it's right here. And let's select two colors because this is a dual color brush. And what should I do? Let's do a blue. And then maybe a green. Any two colors of your choice. I'm going to tap again on the blue so it becomes my main color. Right now my main color is green. The main color is the color you see here. If I tap on this, it's changed that to the blue. Now the dual color damp pencil is kind of like a wet pencil, kind of like a watercolor pencil. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. When you use light pressure, it looks like this, like a pencil. And then if you use heavy pressure, it looks like this. So if you zoom in, it's like there's bits of pigment and then someone's put water over them and you see it looks a little bit liquidy in the center. Just a tad, not too much. And depending on how much pressure you apply, you'll see more of one color than the other. So that's essentially how I use this brush. You can also tilt this brush as well, but you don't see too much of an effect with the tilt. It's meant to be used without the tilt. Now, what would I use this brush for? I would use this brush for doing something like details, or use it kind of like a watercolor pencil. So what I'm finding is that for this particular set of colors, you're not seeing the dual color as much. So I'm going to change this a bit to another color, maybe yellow and green. When the colors are a bit more different, you can really see the impact. Yeah. So low pressure, I'm seeing more of that yellow, but heavy pressure, I'm seeing more of the green. See more of that difference. Now, how would I use this? So let's say I wanted to paint in a leaf. You can paint it in with light pressure. So this is kind of like a watercolor pencil. So I would use it like that. And then to create a little bit more of a watercolor effect for this, I would just go to the smudge tool and use Smudger A to zoom in and use it at the smallest size and just smudge it slightly. So you know how when you use watercolor pencil and then you put some water on top of it, that's kind of what this particular pencil is inspired by. It will create that sort of look. It's actually quite nice with flowers. So let me show you with some colors that are more like flowers. So let's go in here and select that. And maybe for this color, select something like this. Actually, these are too close to each other. There. So I'm going to select these two colors. Any two colors are your choice, doesn't matter. And let's just roughly paint in a very quick basic flower. And make sure that you vary the pressure. Okay, so that's kind of like a watercolor pencil. And now let's say we want to make it more watercolory. Just smudge it out. So this is just a fun thing to use in certain illustrations. I wouldn't use this for all illustrations, but for some illustrations, that's kind of a nice look. All right, so let's move on to the next brushes. Tap on the brush menu, and we have huge eraser and edge eraser. Tap on huge eraser, and let's make sure that we've turned off pencils and we're on the erasers menu. All right. So huge eraser and edge eraser. So if you are aware, you can erase an entire screen really quickly in Procreate just by using 3 fingers. So let me show you that first, and then I'll show you why I made the edge eraser. So let's say I've painted something on my screen here. And if I want to remove everything off the screen, all I need to do is 3 fingers and then swipe. But do you see what happened? Because everything went away, these 2 words also went away. But let's say I don't want those 2 words to go away, but I want all this to go away. One way to do that is using the selection tool, lassoing around it, and then erasing it, which is not really fun. Or using an eraser from Procreate default brushes, but some of them are quite small. They take a long time to erase this. So that's when you use the huge eraser. So to use the huge eraser, what you want to do is go to the eraser menu, not the brush menu. You have to go to the eraser menu and go to Messy Watercolor, huge eraser, and then just erase. It erases nicely and cleanly, and I don't know what it is. It's much more satisfying than using the selection tool to erase. I love erasing with this. It's so much fun. And a lot of the other erasers, they take far too long. So this one, you can change up the size. You can make it really, really big too. So this is the huge eraser. Then we have the edge eraser. So let me show you what that does. So let me lay down some pigment with, let's say, dual color rough edge. Let's lay down some pigment. Okay. So now let's say I wanted to erase part of this. If I use the huge eraser, I'm going to go to the eraser menu, and if I use this, do you see how that edge is just so clean? It doesn't look realistic. Not a good choice if you're trying to erase just the edges. So undo with 2 fingers, and then I'm going to tap on edge eraser, and I'm going to go to size 70, and let's have a look. Ooh, that's nice. So now you can erase things, but you're still retaining that, I guess, knobbly, wobbly texture. And if you increase the size, it will look like that. If you decrease the size, it will look like that. So it retains some texture on the edges. And I like to use this when I'm trying to erase something, when I've already laid down a particular shape. So that's what I would use the edge eraser for. Now let's move on to the next brushes, which are the smudgers. So let's tap on the layers menu, uncheck erasers, tap on smudgers and check it. And let's go to smudgers. All right, so in order to smudge something, we have to lay down some paint first. So let's just lay down some paint. So let's go again. Actually, maybe let's use the basic watercolor for this. So I'm going to lay down I'm going to use these 2 colors that I have. So I'm going to lay down some pigment. Oops, I don't know what happened there. All right, okay. Lay down some pigment here, and then let's go to the red. Lay down some pigment. Oh, it's dark. And then lay down some pigment. All right. So now let's say you wanted to smudge these edges here. Use the smudger. So this is your smudge tool, so you can tap on it, and then Messy Watercolor, and then go to Smudger A. And with smudgers, size really does make a big, big difference. So I always recommend start out small and then move your way up. So let's zoom in. And with this brush, you can start to smudge. Do you see at a small size, it's a very subtle smudge. I'm going to undo. I'm going to go to a much larger size and smudge. Do you see how that looks quite different? And you can smudge outwards too, like this. It's kind of cloud-like, billowy almost. And I would recommend that you smudge outwards and not inwards. If you were to smudge inwards, you would be smudging white into your painted area. That doesn't look very natural, so I would always smudge outwards. So that's what you can do. But keep in mind, when you smudge, you lose some of that inherent texture underneath. So just keep that in mind. Now let's move on to Smudger B, which is slightly different. So go to your smudging tool menu and tap on Smudger B. As you can tell, they look quite different, and I would use them for different things. So now, same thing here. I'm going to zoom in, and let's start with the smaller size, which is 25. And this is a directional smudger. So the direction in which you're pushing your pencil makes a huge difference. So let's say I want to push in the pigment, this red pigment, into the orange side. So I go like this and release the pencil. So I am pushing and release. So do you see the effect that I'm getting? That's very different from the effect I was getting there. They both smudge, it's just very different effects. I'm going to undo this. And there's another way of using this too. You can use it quickly in both directions, like this. So it's a slightly different effect. Here you're seeing both the red move in here and the orange move in this direction. You can also smudge in this direction. And you get that kind of a look. But if you change the brush size, so I'm going to show you that. Undo, higher brush size. You can create this sort of look. So very, very different. And I would recommend that you play around and use the one that's best suited for your particular illustration. So that covers the brushes for part 1. We will be discussing the rest of the brushes in part 2 and 3 of this video series, but I did want to talk about paper texture. So as you can see, we've been using all of these brushes on a paper texture. Now, this is the brush tutorial canvas, so you will not be painting in here. This is not for that purpose, but we do have 2 canvases for that. So let's go back to the gallery. And these 2 you receive complimentary with this brush set. There's a 4800 by 6000 pixel, quite big. I don't generally recommend working this big unless you're working on something that you plan to sell. then I would recommend working there. But if you are painting for yourself day to day, you don't need something that big. 8x10 is great, and the advantage of the 8x10, you can do printouts of your artwork and use it in your home. This is why I love to do all of my paintings in an 8x10, because then I can always print it and put it up on the wall. So what you get in this brush set is a paper texture canvas that is ready to go. So basically all you have to do is open up the layers menu, and where it says paint here, just start painting here. And then if you want to add more layers, you can add layers here and on top of this. Basically you want all of your layers where you're coloring to be in between this top paper overlay and this bottom paper background. So that's basically like a sandwich here. So let's just paint very quickly, just some pigment. Let's just do, let's say, dual color background B. Let's put in some pigment here. Okay, so I want to explain how the paper texture file works. I'm going to rotate this so you can see it in this direction. So what we have is a paper background and a paper overlay. So the paper background is what you're seeing here. This particular area here and here in the white areas, that's your background. It's wonderful to paint in Procreate, but I don't recommend printing with the paper background. It just does not look good. So whenever I print something and I'm preparing a file for print, I'll turn that off. And what you'll see is now our background is completely white. We don't see any texture, but we still see texture on top of this particular painted area. And that's what we want. I like that texture. That is coming from the paper overlay. Now, if I turn that off, it would look like this. So do you see, it still has some watercolor texture, but it really comes to life with the paper texture. So I recommend keeping that paper overlay on, but you can turn it on if you'd like. The results will not be as intended. Now, in this paper overlay, we have a bunch of different layers. Right now I have a paper texture, and then I have a secondary paper texture and a recycled texture. You can turn these on and off. So let me zoom in. I don't know if you can see this. It just adds a little hint of imperfection. The recycled texture, I like to keep it on. And if you want even more paper texture, do you see that? It's subtle because I don't like anything that looks a little too much. So, and you can also go in, tap on CB, and you can change how much of this you see. Let me zoom out so you can really see. So that's what that looks like. And if I want to see more of the texture, I go up some more. So it's really up to you. How heavy do you want that texture to be? It depends on your illustration. I think for some illustrations, it looks really good with a higher opacity, but for some, you may not want the paper texture to be as apparent. So this gives you the choice of changing it. So I hope that was helpful and you got some great insight into how to use some of the brushes in the set. We are going to use a lot more fun brushes in part 2. This was like the baby steps. We're going to use a lot more variety of brushes in part 2 of this series, where we're going to discuss all of these fun brushes here. We've got shape makers. These are game changers when it comes to loose watercolor. And then we have an overlay brush. We have so many fun things. So we're going to discuss that in part 2. So I would suggest taking a break, let this all sink in, and then I will meet you in part 2 of this series. And if you haven't yet purchased the brush set and you are interested, as I mentioned, you can find the link in the description and the pinned comment. See you next time. Bye.